Night. 10:34 is the time right now. Well, a tweet the other day from archaeologist Jonathan Fowler caught my eye. It read, "Consider your surroundings the next time you are lining up for fries at Bud the Spud on Spring Garden Road. There are approximately 20,000 people buried all around you." Jonathan Fowler joins me on the phone this morning to tell us more. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good day, sir.
How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Not too bad. I'm actually on the road. I pulled over in Grand Pré. We're heading down the valley for some field work today.
Oh, yeah? Whereabouts?
Oh, down Digby area.
And this is around Port Royal in that area too? Those places? Or
That's the one. That's the one. We're just running some field tests on some equipment. Nothing terribly exciting, but nevertheless, it's a day to be out. And the monsoon has passed, so I favor that.
Yeah, me too. But you just finished wrapping up a survey of the old burying ground in downtown Halifax. You call it the last visible remnant of a district you referred to as the Halifax Necropolis. Explain that, please.
Well, you got it. So we are, in fact, just generating some new mapping, in fact, even just last night, of the old burying ground. And it's a National Historic Site that folks may be familiar with. It's down at the corner of Spring Garden Road and Barrington Street. And it's the town of Halifax's first cemetery. It goes all the way back to 1749. And in doing this background work and presenting it to the Old Burying Ground Foundation and writing up the report, I thought it would be worthwhile putting that site in its context, and that means its historical and landscape context. It was, when it was founded, when it was established, it was just outside the old town wall. That's why it's there. The boundary is just to the north of it. And there were other cemeteries in the area, and I don't think anyone's ever really paid sufficient attention to this. We've got 5 cemeteries in that area.
Really?
Yeah, so right around, that's why I mentioned Bud the Spud, so right by the old Memorial Library there, in that plot, we've got the Poorhouse Cemetery, and that dates to about 1760.
And we understand there may be upwards of maybe 4,500 people buried at that location?
That's the estimate. Yeah, the records are incomplete, but that's an estimate by historians. And across Grafton Street, next to the Catholic Church, there's a parking lot there, and that's a Catholic cemetery underneath that parking lot. And there are on the order of 3,000 people buried there.
And I was told, Jonathan, that at that location there's a Russian prince or something like that who's buried there?
I think a Russian ambassador, if memory serves, from the early 19th century. That cemetery dates to 1784, which is right after a period when Catholicism was essentially given permission. Catholics were given permission to worship more freely in Nova Scotia at that point, and so a church was established there. And but other people got in there, not just Catholics, but there's a range of folks. So we've got that one. Just up in the neighborhood of the old Memorial Library, there's a Jewish cemetery, which is very little known, but it dates very early, 1750s, apparently.
Wow.
And then, of course, behind the old Memorial Library is the old Methodist cemetery, which was where St. David's Church is now. So that site's been built on and heavily modified. But the other ones are well, as has the Memorial Library site, but those other cemeteries, you take them all together, and you're looking at about 20,000 burials, basically in the heart of the downtown.
Well, how come they've been, again, paved over, built on? How did that allow to be happen?
It happens in lots of cities all over the world, and that's partly why I use the term necropolis, because sometimes cities make the decision to really protect these areas and hold them up as places of memory. So necropolises exist. If you want to Google Glasgow over in Scotland, they've got a famous necropolis, for example. But it just happens through growth, and gradually these places become abandoned and neglected, and sometimes they're a bit of an eyesore, and people decide, particularly after some time has passed and they don't have perhaps close family bonds with the place, they just think, let's pave it over. But in Nova Scotia, you shouldn't have that, because we have, of course, the Cemeteries and Monuments Protection Act, which says that these sites are protected. But if you read the fine print, they're not as protected as they appear.
Obviously, and the one at St. Mary's, for example, it's now a parking lot, right?
Oh, yeah, and that's to say nothing of what might happen there if somebody wants to build something on that land, or as we see now with the old Memorial Library site, it's an open question what will be allowed to happen at these places.
Well, you tweeted as well that you'd like to see that old Halifax Memorial Library salvaged, saved. Give us a sense of what you'd like to see done there.
Well, I do think that we do not have sufficient infrastructure in Halifax to tell the many stories of Halifax and its many communities. And I think what I'm talking about here is a civic museum and research center, and a place for storytellers and a place for visitors to visit and understand the city better, and for us to understand our own city better. So I think some kind of a civic museum might go well there, an archive. But, ultimately I'll have to say that if that's not to happen, so be it. But I do think it would be, I think, an ethical failure to see construction on any of these sites, because they are cemeteries.
Well, hopefully your voice added to other voices that are now calling on the city to save the old Halifax Memorial Library. And again, we've talked with David Jones and others on many occasions, Jonathan, about Blair Beat as well, about how the city has basically failed at promoting its own history, how much more the city needs to do. I mean, we've got a very rich history here in the city, going back to 1749, as you pointed out. Let's start talking about it more. Let's start promoting it. Let's start showing people where this history is.
Yeah, and even beyond that, if you get into the French period prior to, the Indigenous story goes back thousands of years. It's an incredible resource, and other communities would kill to get heritage resources like the ones we take for granted and neglect. And it's a lost opportunity. It's a real failure on our part. And I'll give you one little anecdote. I was over in the old burying ground there last week, just finishing up our survey, and I was looking over the fence. Guy walked by. I think he'd come off one of the cruise ships. And he said, "Hey, when's this place open?" And I said, "Well, we're just in here doing this survey. I think it opens in another couple of weeks." He says, "It should be open." I said, "Yeah, I know, but it's a community group that runs it, and they do good work, and they've got limited resources." And he said, "Hey, what are you doing? We want to see this stuff."
Yep.
And that's just one example, and that's not a criticism of the Old Burying Ground Foundation, but I think that's on all of us as Haligonians. We're not exactly making our visitors welcome in the way that we could, and it is a resource. This guy was from Chester, England, and he said, I want to see this stuff. I'm interested in this stuff. And he said, there's a tour group down there at the gate, and the guy's talking and pointing inside.
Wow.
And
yeah.
They would stream up into these facilities if we had them open, and these are real money-making ventures. If you can't be convinced for all the good cultural reasons, I tell you, they're an economic resource, too, and we're failing on that.
Indeed. Well said. Well said. Hopefully they're listening down at City Hall here. Jonathan Fowler, I'll let you continue on your way, and appreciate the time here this morning. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Have a great day. You too. Bye-bye. Jonathan Fowler, an archaeologist, and, again, someone with a good message about how we preserve and commemorate and acknowledge our history here in Halifax. 10:43 is the time right now.